Okay, welcome to this webinar, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you not just what the science tells us, but also what I have experienced from coaching athletes like this in the professional sporting world. So we're going to be looking at breath holding and conditioning and the application of that, also what some of the recent literature is telling us as to why it's working and why it can be beneficial and why we might want to incorporate it into our training, or if you're a coach, into your coaches, into your clients' training. And a particular emphasis in this particular webinar, we'll be talking about high intensity work like repeat sprintability or like interval style type of training where we can integrate things into. So high intensity interval training, that type of either exercise or sports that require that type of fast recovery anaerobic bouts of work. So we'll be getting into that. Truth be told, it's not rocket science in that when you're trying to improve someone's ability to recover quickly or recover better during short periods of time, when you're challenging their system with a high intensity bout of work that's going to be anaerobic in nature, if we can make it more anaerobic utilizing something like a breath hold, and we'll go into the detail of this, then you're going to have a stronger stimulus, and that is then going to give us the opportunity to have a stronger adaptation. It's sort of as simple as that. The funny thing about rocket science, my dad used to always say, the rocket science isn't actually that complicated either. You need a lot of fuel, and you need to set it on fire, and you need to point it down, and then your rocket's going to go up. So ironically, apparently rocket science isn't that complicated either. We're going to get into some of the nitty gritty, but that is a like a broad statement of like, we're creating a stronger stimulus for the adaptation we're looking for, and therefore we can get a stronger adaptation. And this is what the literature and the science are showing us. And then this is what I'm seeing with the professional athletes that I work with. So this is me when I knew nothing about breathing. I've learned a little bit over the years now, and I'm excited to share what I've been learning and also what I've been utilizing with international and professional athletes in a variety of different sports, but primarily like my main sport, because I played professionally for 13 years, is rugby. Like, I know rugby, I understand the game, and enjoy coaching and still being involved in rugby. I'm now a master instructor with the Oxford Advantage. Some of you have done on this call now have done the Oxford Advantage certification with me. I've got some more coming up next year. I think some people said they're interested, and I'm one of the mentors with the Oxford Advantage. So I helped create the mentorship program for coaches. So I work with athletes, but work with coaches alongside them to help them with their coaching ability. So this is this is part of a a presentation, a talk, a speech that I did at the UK Strength and Conditioning Conference this year. So I'm an accredited UKCA, so strength and conditioning coach. That's sort of my background. I've obviously gone sort of deep dive into breathing and breath training. And interestingly, I was worried that the strength and conditioning world wasn't going to be interested in hearing about breath holding or breathing and how that can influence all sorts of things, but particularly around conditioning, around recovery. And yes, it was. It's great to see that athletes are taking this on now, and it's a game changer if you start to implement for yourself or with athletes or clients that you work with. Start to implement some of the parts around breath training that we see from the literature, explains the mechanisms as to why it works and why it's beneficial. And then from my direct experience working with athletes and also experimenting on myself, see those results, those effects. That when you start to train a system that you've never trained before, even if you think you might have noticed your breathing, we're not training our breath unless we're doing something specific for it. And that's, there's probably a whole nother webinar or something on that, and I go into that type of stuff in workshops that I'm delivering. But yeah, we're going to get to a place hopefully at the end of this session where you understand some of the benefits of breath holding. You can see where some of the practical applications are, and I'll share some stories from the field of what we've been doing. So for some people, this may be unlikely necessarily to be to you because you've signed up to want to, listen into what this presentation is about. But how much is breath training worth exploring? And it might be that you, as a coach, you come across this like I do sometimes, where people are a little bit skeptical. But in total honesty, I was completely skeptical, and I was actually very dismissive years and years ago of the importance of breathing and the function of my diaphragm, and all these things that I wish I could have started a long time ago. So yeah, hopefully it'll give you a bit more meat on the bone as to why that is important, beneficial. Have some ideas of how you can integrate it in to some of the training that we're already doing. That's a big part for me, is around integration, rather than always asking our clients or athletes to just do more stuff. There's only so much they can do. And it's actually really beneficial to integrate it in, because some of the research, not the bits that we're going to touch on today, but the research shows us that, and again, it's obvious, like specific adaptations or imposed demands is a principle that says, like, the more specific my training is, the more specific the adaptations are. Well, if I integrate some of the breath training tools that we're going to look at, and breath holding is going to be one of them, into the training that I'm doing, the more sport specific it is, the more sport specific adaptations that I get. So that's sort of fairly self-explanatory and obvious. Two parts. We're going to explain what some of the scientific literature and research has been showing us, and then the second part is then how I've been applying that in the professional sporting field, and look at some opportunities that we might have to integrate this into your own training, or if you're a coach, into training with athletes that you may be working with. Okay, so as a starting point, and look, this quote is from 1995. I can still remember 1995. I was relatively young then, but that's a long time ago now. I know I'm 41 now, and if you're in your 40s, 95 probably seems like yesterday, but it's actually quite a long time ago. It's over 20 years ago. It's 20, what is it? It's going to be 2024, so it's like nearly 29 years ago. We've known this stuff for a long time. And this is highlighting the relationship with carbon dioxide tolerance, our ability to tolerate carbon dioxide buildup in the muscle tissues, in the blood, in the lungs, but combined with physiological, biochemical, and psychological elements or components, all add up to make an outstanding athlete. And what I've been seeing more and more with the breath training that I utilize now with athletes is that there is an element of the physiological, there's an element of the biochemical, so the CO2 tolerance part particularly, and the lactate is what we're going to go into and see, and the psychological are all things that we can touch upon, that we can influence, that we can give a stimulus to, as well as the CO2 tolerance, which is sort of like the obvious one when we're talking about breath holding. So it's multi-dimensional. We're going to feel like we're talking about one thing, but hopefully you'll see how broad that it allows to do, and why I get so, one, excited about teaching breath training to athletes, but two, also the breadth at which that it can touch upon. That's what I hope we get to. So we're going to go more, we're going to dial into gradually now in terms of literature around like anaerobic work, like repeat sprintability is like a phrase that we'll use, or you'll see in the literature. And RS here stands for repeat sprint, and the H is hypoxia and N is normal. So based on current scientific literature, repeat sprint hypoxia So that is lower levels of oxygen, which we can get through breath holding, or they can use hypoxic chambers. Induces greater improvement for mean repeated sprint performance during sea level repeated sprint training compared to or than repeat sprint normal, meaning just breathing normally. So if we have a hypoxic effect, which can be cheap, free, and easily done through holding of the breath, or expensively through a hypoxic chamber or a mask, then that's controlling the levels of oxygen in the air. That not just a resistance mask, one that's actually controlling the airflow in terms of the amount of oxygen that's in there, percentage-wise. So when we have a hypoxic effect, we get a greater improvement in repeat sprintability compared to just letting someone breathe normally during training. That was a meta-analysis done in 2017. So that's nearly 7 years ago. So even that's not that new, is it? That tells me, like, as a personal trainer, as a strength and conditioning coach, we didn't get taught any of this. And that's one reason why I'm like, come on, let's talk about it. It's one day I was excited to speak at the UKCA conference. Like, come on, like, it's right here in front of us. Let's look at it. Why are we not looking at it? It's so simple as well. But if you can create a hypoxic environment rather than just breathing normally, you're going to get a greater improvement in repeat sprintability. So let's do it then. Why wouldn't we do it? So we're going to go into the detail of that. So there's one particular study that, for me, working within rugby, there are other studies that this one guy involved in this is French scientist Xavier Warrens. He's done study 2018 here with professional rugby players. 2020 was in basketball. I think 2022 he's done it with ice hockey. So across a range of sports, and there's been loads done in swimming as well. But this one, because of rugby and the types of sport that I'm involved in, really important. Really interesting. Yeah. So this was a study done for hypoxic training, but through breath holding, and looking to improve repeat sprintability. And they found a 10x improvement, and anyone that's involved in sports should be as sort of like, what? This was done 10x. They improved by a factor of 10, not twice as good, not 3 times as good, 10 times better, the group that did the breath hold during their training compared to the group that breathed normally in their training. In season, so this was when they had games at the weekend, and it was in just 4 weeks. Like, to me, that's insane. I played professional for 13 years. You weren't really expected to make any improvements in fitness or anything during season. It was just about maintenance and maintaining. So a factor of 10, like it's we're going to get there. Hopefully you're with me. So it was published in the European Journal of Sports Science. And what they did was they had 40-meter repeat sprints, which would take them on average around about 6 seconds to do. Okay, they would have to go every 30 seconds, their interval. So a 6-second sprint, 40 meters, they'd then have 24 seconds rest until the next 30 seconds was up. They tested their max speed at the start, and the test was over. Their way of testing was like, how many reps could you do of this 40-meter sprint with every 30 seconds? The test was over when they couldn't reach 85% of their maximal speed that they had tested when they were fresh at the start. Make sense? The 4-week trial was 2 sessions a week, and they basically had one group breathe normally, and the other group was exhale and then hold the breath. It was done on an exhale rather than an inhale, because when we hold the breath on an exhale, we get a stronger or quicker hypoxic response in terms of low levels of oxygen within the blood. And that's one of the things that we were looking to try and stimulate, back to that quote we've seen at the start from 1995. Okay. What's really interesting is what happens with the levels of CO2 as well. And the two go hand in hand. Yeah. So when we hold the breath on an inhale, you've got your lungs full of oxygen. And then you hold your breath, your body starts using that oxygen up, it starts leaving your blood and going into the tissues. Well, then what was in your lungs gets to fill up what was in your blood. So you don't get hypoxic, or you don't get to low levels of oxygen as quick as if you were to hold your breath on an exhale on relatively empty lungs. Low lung volume will be the phrase that you'll see in the literature here. Then you can't replenish the oxygen that leaves your blood whilst you're holding the breath, so you get to a hypoxic state quicker. Yeah? And hypoxia being below 90, 91% in terms of our blood oxygen saturation as a percentage. Yeah. We can get that quite quickly by doing some fairly intense anaerobic work with short rest periods. So that was the protocol. The test was how many reps they could do of the 40 meter sprints every 30 seconds until they couldn't run 85% of their max. And then their 2 training sessions a week for 4 weeks was doing, I think they started with 2 sets of 6 or 2 sets of 5, something like that, and worked up to maybe 3 sets of 8 or 2 sets of 8. They just basically over the 4 weeks gradually increased the reps and sets that they were doing, and they were basically training the test. They were running 40 meters every 30 seconds. Yeah, that was the training session, and then they retest again at the end. What they saw, there was 21 professional rugby players, and say done in season. The control group that were breathing normally, there was 10 of them. Their blood oxygen saturation stayed in that their mean value, their average was normal. Normal was 95 to 99. They were within normal ranges, maybe dropped ever so slightly, but they definitely didn't get hypoxic. They did 9.8 reps of the 40 meter sprints in week 1 or the start, and at the end of the 4 weeks, they'd improved by 6% because they managed to do 10.4 reps on average. Yeah, that was the average for that group of 10. The group that held their breath after an exhale, which was the voluntary hypoventilation at low lung volume, meaning holding the breath after exhalation, there was 11 of them. Their blood oxygen saturation for a third of the time was severe hypoxia, 88%. Yeah, much lower than these guys, obviously, because they were holding their breath. Their average was 90.1. Their reps on the test at the start, they were 9.1. They increased to 14.9, a 64% improvement. Like, it's absolutely mad. And that's where it's like, they improved by 64%, and this group improved by only 6%. So like over 10x their improvement increase. Like, that's mad in season in 4 weeks. Okay. So one of the things that we're looking at, and the literature is reporting on particularly, is the hypoxic side of what we're doing here. Yeah, when we hold the breath, we're measuring their levels of hypoxia, and we're seeing that when we hold the breath, it's becoming more hypoxic, and they're making loads more improvements, like that cause correlation type of effect. And there's definitely a huge emphasis coming from stimulus and challenge for the system when we're breath holding and sprinting 40 meters with short rest periods, and we see the results that's coming on here. Now, there is a lot of literature and research on hypoxic training as a whole, as a thing, and often in the past, a lot of it has been done by manipulating the air that you're breathing. I myself took part in one where it wasn't like a study, but I took part in an experiment where it was at St George's Park where England football train, and they've got a chamber there that they made the atmospheric air sort of pressure and available oxygen the equivalent of being at the top of Mount Everest. And then there were 2 of us on a watt bike doing like a watt bike session, and literally within about 3 seconds of pedaling, I was absolutely blowing. And I at this point, this was way before I'd come across all this breathing stuff. So it was really interesting to reflect back on it. But yeah, you're just completely out of breath immediately. You just can't handle what's going on. And there's a number of things going on when we're looking at like altitude style training, not just the lower levels of oxygen in the air. But this is where a lot of the hypoxic training has been done, where we reduce the levels of oxygen. Normal is like 20.9 as a percentage. reduce it down to like 14 and a half, something like that. Yeah. Altitude training, when people go up to sort of 3,000 plus meters of altitude, we start to get blood oxygen saturations of around 90%. So um, trying to create a hypoxic effect by being up at altitude is another way of people creating some hypoxic training. What's interesting and what's very different about this style of hypoxic training compared to when we do breath holding to create the hypoxic effect is that carbon dioxide levels remain relatively unchanged around, in terms of pressure within the body, within the blood, about 40 milligrams of mercury pressure. That's normal, and it stays normal, even though oxygen's down low because you're allowing yourself to breathe. It's just that the air that you're breathing has got less oxygen available in it, so you're going to get hypoxic. Whereas with breath holding, we get hypoxic and hypercapnic. So with breath holding, it's very easy for us to get under 91%, and they did so in that study. But we also get hypercapnic, which is high CO2 levels. When CO2 with breath holding can go, CO2 levels in the body affect the acid-base balance that we'll talk about, and it's quite potent. It changes quite quickly and strongly. Carbon dioxide gets carried, 65% of it gets carried as carbonic acid within the blood, and so it makes it quite acidic quite quickly, and the body wants to keep homeostasis, so it's working hard to make sure that it doesn't go too crazy. So 40 to 45 doesn't sound like much, but that's a big change in terms of CO2, in particular up to 50. Like, it's going to have a big effect on the acid-base balance in the body, making it more acidic. The same way like lactic acid buildup is going to make the system more acidic. The body gets better at balancing that acidosis. Someone said at the beginning before I hit the record that they've done breath holding, but in sort of hyperventilation style, like Wim Hof type of practice. And when we do that, when you do a breath hold after a series of like 30 big hyperventilating breaths, you become hypoxic during the breath hold because you hold your breath for a long time. But the fact that you've done the hyperventilation, you'll have breathed out, a significant amount of carbon dioxide before you do the breath hold. So you become hypocapnic rather than hypercapnic. You become low oxygen and low CO2, and hence why it's easy to hold the breath. You'll get some hypoxic effect, but you're not getting the effect that we're going to see the hypercapnia is creating. And with that style of breathing, breath hold practice, hyperventilating and then retention is done lying down. It can be dangerous because the hypoxia levels you get to is very low. You could pass out. You wouldn't want to do that style of breathing with sprinting. That wouldn't be safe or appropriate. Whereas when we do just a normal exhalation and hold the breath, like everything's fine, you're all corpus mentis. So it's very useful to be able to integrate that straight into training. And that's one of the things about the breath holding is that talk about specific adaptation to imposed demands, talk about being sport specific. You can do breath holding in your rugby boots on the field in a drill that you're supposed to be taking part in. Whereas if you're going to do a hypoxic training session in terms of like you've got to sit on a watt bike in a chamber or with a mask on that's changing the amount of oxygen that's in the air, it's a very clinical environment. It's not necessarily sport specific unless you do cycling. So the big question is it just down to the hypoxia that caused that 10x improvement, or are we seeing something different when we do breath holding to create the hypoxia as opposed to just manipulating the levels of oxygen in the air and letting people breathe normally? And this study pulls out a few really interesting points. They saw a greater muscle deoxygenation and blood lactate accumulation from the hypoxic effect, but also theorizing from the hypercapnic effect. When we get this low muscle oxygenation, meaning we're holding the breath, so we're starving the body of oxygen to a degree, so you'll be getting less oxygen delivered to the muscle tissues. We're having to create energy because you're asking your body to sprint. You're still having to create energy, but through that anaerobic pathway, that anaerobic glycolysis, which creates lactic acid as a byproduct. That's going to create muscle acidosis. But whilst we're holding the breath as well, we are that starving of oxygen is going to be there, as well as the fact that you're sprinting, working anaerobically. So we're making it even more anaerobic from a low oxygen perspective. But whilst we hold the breath as well, the increase in carbon dioxide that you're not letting leave the body is going to create a stronger acidic environment, because we get this accumulation of H plus ions when we keep carbon dioxide within the body. It gets carried as carbonic acid as it wants to get transported through into the blood and out of the body. But you're not letting it out, and that carbonic acid dissociates into a bicarbonate and a H plus ion. So we see this greater accumulation in lactate, greater accumulation in H plus ions in the tissues and in the blood. And basically the body has to deal with that. The body can't stay in that sort of state. It can't stay really acidic. So it does what it can to try and buffer those metabolites, and essentially you're going to have a greater accumulation of blood lactate, so a stronger amount of it, a stronger stimulus. Over the 4 weeks, these people started to find, well, actually, they improved their lactate clearing, how well the body could actually get rid of it, because it was used to having more of it, and it adapts. And that's what training's about. We provide a stimulus that we want, and we adapt. And breath holding in this scenario is giving us a stronger stimulus. So the accumulation of H plus ions within the muscle tissue being an important factor leading to fatigue during repeated sprints. When we're exposing the body to that stimulus that creates fatigue, the body improves its ability to regulate and balance pH, and that having one of the biggest effects on why we saw an improvement, or why they saw an improvement in that repeat sprint by so much in just 4 weeks, like 10 times better. And I come back to it being not rocket science. I go, okay, well, you're trying to give someone some anaerobic training to do, and so you want them to work hard anaerobically. You want them to have not quite so much rest, and you want them to recover quickly and be able to do those bouts of work again. Their ability to tolerate H plus ion accumulation is known from the literature to be a massive factor in being able to recover and go again. Well, when you hold the breath, reducing that oxygen and increasing those levels of CO2 within the body are all creating a stronger stimulus to the thing you want to get better at. And all you got to do is hold your breath. But we haven't seen it. But we're starting to see it now. Yeah, and even that 2018, that's nearly 6 years ago. So, like I said, this stuff is coming. I've been doing it now for 3 years with professional athletes, and it's really just the start. It's only going to become more and more. So what's happening essentially in let's sort of simplify it and summarize it. We're essentially disrupting the acid-base balance. We're creating a more acidic environment. We saw that we're increasing lactate tolerance and clearance of the lactate, as well as the pH regulation and buffering. Some of that, the theory being coming from regulation of potassium ions within the muscle tissues. And then also a really interesting one was we're starving the body of oxygen with that breath hold, and they're seeing a greater reoxygenation during recovery periods. And one thing that we know helps oxygen be released from hemoglobin in red blood cells is what? Carbon dioxide. And we're tolerating higher levels of carbon dioxide when we're doing this breath holding work. So the oxygen that is found within the blood is able to get out easily during those recovery periods. So we get a faster reoxygenation, hence the improved recovery, and then being able to go again and do more repeated sprints. And I think the big thing for me around integration is this bit. It's easy to do. You don't need any equipment. You don't need a hypoxic chamber. You don't need anything. You just need to exhale, hold the breath. I think it's fair to say that we don't need anything in terms of equipment. What we need is understanding and the tools to be able to implement this in and be progressive with it, because it can be, I'll tell you a story of it being fairly intense for when we're starting out. So we need ways to make it progressive, and we need some tools of what the actual practical application is going to be like, not in a study, but like in the sporting field, in real life. So that is where I'm going to take us now. So as we switch now from what the literature was telling us to what I've been seeing and experiencing when coaching this, one of the biggest things to draw out is to go, that improvement they saw in repeat sprintability, their ability to recover, their ability to go again, was just from holding the breath on an exhale. That was all they did. They did nothing different, nothing else. They didn't teach them anything about managing their breathing after that breath hold. They didn't do any down regulation work. They didn't teach them anything about mechanics. And one thing that I love about teaching breath holding with the athletes when I work with them on breath holding is it's an opportunity to teach them other stuff as well. Because when you hold the breath, when you let go of it and you've been sprinting or whatever it is that you're doing, you know about it. Your breathing tells you about it, and they're eager to learn how to control that response. And that's one of the things that we get to do. So it's a great opportunity to help them manage their breathing. It's a great opportunity to teach them better biomechanics. So rib cage, alignment of the rib cage, how the rib cage expands. I've done loads of seminars on this, and I've got courses all on this. How the diaphragm is supposed to function within those mechanics of the rib cage. Teach them about body language and how body language, not just how they hold their body posture, but how body language, when we're talking about breathing, is you're reading how you're controlling your rate of breathing and whether you're able to use the nose or the mouth and the difference between those. An opportunity to explain to them about brain states, be able to give them some ways to regulate their breathing when they feel out of breath and make them mentally and cognitively be able to feel better, giving them even some cognitive tasks, even if it's just counting how many paces they take when they do their breath hold, but seeing how that challenges their ability to focus and concentrate when they're getting quite hypoxic and hypercapnic. There's a huge mental resilience that we get to work on, that psychological side that makes up an outstanding athletic performer. That quote right at the start said, like, holding the breath and doing anaerobic work is hard. It's a real physiological stress to the body and nervous system, but it's also a real mental stress, and you can change your psychological and physiological response to that type of stress, and that builds some mental resilience in a real stressful environment, just like we have on the sporting field or within the sporting arena. The pressure and stress on athletes to perform can be paralyzing at times, and so an opportunity to help them with that side of it as well. And then finally, giving them some tools, giving them some understanding of how the autonomic nervous system works and how their breathing is an intimate part of that, and their breathing is a reflection of that autonomic nervous system. But equally, the breathing can be the remote control to help them manage their autonomic nervous system. So I think I see all those opportunities with it, and I think one of the misconceptions is that particularly if you think a high level athlete, I've had international sports men and women playing at the highest level not be able to feel their diaphragm contraction on an inhale, lying down on the floor in their first session with me. If you can't feel your diaphragm in the easiest position possible, lying on the floor, supported, it not having to stabilize, and you can just breathe with no stress around you, and you can't feel that diaphragm moving, there's absolutely no chance that diaphragm's working effectively and optimally when you're stressing the body and nervous system through physical exercise at the highest level in the sporting arena. Yeah, and I think one of the things that a phrase here that I often say is just because it's automatic doesn't mean it's optimal. It's also we have to fight against the intuition, like what the body doesn't want you to breathe so well that you can keep stressing it. The body wants you to stop stressing it when you do a hard training session, so it breathes in a way that makes you stop really inefficiently. Like, it's actually pretty clever. We can be a little bit more clever and go, oh, actually, we know what helps us regulate our breathing rate and allows us to not reduce fatigue, and I can actually then carry on going. But we've got to understand this, and the misconception that just because you are um, physically fit or physically active that you're going to be better at breathing. It's actually, this is just one study, and it was done in Japan. So I take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but it is an example to show that there was, I think, nearly 2,000 people in this study. The 91% of them, and they were all of the athletic population, were diagnosed as dysfunctional breathing in their breathing mechanics. So despite them being engaged in physical exercise sports, they were, 9 out of 10 of them were dysfunctional with their breathing, because if it's not good at rest, the more you exercise, you can get fitter, you can cardiovascularly get better, and the body will adapt, but it won't magically make your breathing be better. All you're going to do is compound the bad breathing mechanics and CO2 sensitivity that you've got, and it will be that your breathing will probably be the thing that limits your physical performance, or potentially limits your physical performance, or at least you could train your breath specifically and get some additional improvements in your athletic performance and recovery. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do. And I think the other thing that I think is really important is, if we're going to implement some breath holding into my training session for myself or for an athlete that I'm coaching, that breath holding is an extra stress. We must give them the tools to manage some additional recovery, and the breath is amazing for that. And I think even if we're not giving them extra stress, we should still teach them that. But it's a great opportunity to give them some tools, and to have some tools for yourself that make you feel really nice after a hard training session, help improve your sleep after a hard training day, and you'll see the benefits that has on our recovery. So that's a really important piece for me when we're training ourselves, or if we're coaching someone. We're very good at making training hard. That's easy. Lift heavier, run further, run faster, do more reps, whatever. It's easy. Anyone can make a session harder. What we need to be better at is making our recovery better, and breathing. If we're not doing something for our breathing to influence our nervous system for recovery, then we're missing a massive, massive trick. So I wanted to share just a couple of examples and stories of where this can fit in, to give you some ideas. The example in the study was sprinting 40 meters every 30 seconds. So if it took 6 seconds to sprint the 40 meters and hold the breath for that time, they'd have 24 seconds rest. That time interval, time frame, might not be applicable for you. It might be that we've got an athlete, if I take a footballer that I work with, where their work is a little bit more aerobic, and they might do a session that's not quite as intense on the anaerobic side of it. And we can integrate breath holding into something what they might be doing, which could be as simple a session as on a watt bike, so off feet. And there's research that shows that doing some off feet work on like a watt bike or a training bike like that has good carryover into on field work with football, with rugby. So doing it off feet takes a little bit of stress off of the system, because we've not got that impact with the floor. And it's a slightly more controlled environment, which is a nice stepping stone for people to work on things like their mechanics. It's easier to work on your mechanics sat down on a bike than when you're running around on a field. And take that example of 1 minute on, 1 minute off might be the session that they do. Okay, they're not going to be able to hold their breath for an entire minute, and they might do 6 reps in a set, let's say. Well, at the start of each minute, for the rep that they're doing, they could start that on a breath hold. The breath hold may last 10 seconds, 8 seconds, whatever it is, depending on how good they are and depending on how intense the interval work is. But it probably is going to be not as intense as the 40-meter sprint. So rather than 6 seconds, the breath hold is going to possibly last a bit longer. So let's say it's 8 seconds. They've still got 52 seconds of work to do for that rep, but they're going to have to regulate their breathing during that, having had that dose of low oxygen a little bit and high CO2 a little bit during that breath hold at the start of the rep. So it's just integrated into the start of the rep, then manage breathing during the rest of the bout of work that they're having to do. Then they've got their minutes recovery. And in their minutes recovery, they're like, okay, let's talk, let's teach you about breathing mechanics. Let's teach you about managing your breathing rate. Let's fill from the bottom up. Let's control that exhalation. Give them some of the tools. Like I teach a recovery breathing protocol, which is essentially like the correct biomechanics, the correct filling up and getting control of your exhale and getting yourself back to nasal breathing. You've got a minute that you can practice that with them before they then start the next rep again. And they can do a breath hold at the start of that next rep. It could be that it's quite intense to start that way. And so if they're doing 6 reps, you do the breath hold just every other one. So on rep 1, rep 3, and rep 5, they would do the breath hold, and on 2, 4, 6, they don't. Like simple ways to integrate it in, but also make it gradual and progressive. I'll tell you one other scenario being had someone recently where psychologically they're like, they want it. I won't necessarily say the sport they're doing, but a very intense sport. Yeah. And we introduced this breath holding, but also with the sports mask, which the sports mask provides resistance to your inhale and your exhale, but also the CO2 that you breathe out when you're trying to recover, when you finished your breath hold, stays in the mask and you re-breathe the carbon dioxide in. Like, it's very, 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 very intense. And I was quite, maybe it wasn't good coaching, but I was happy to allow this individual to, I know they wanted to push themselves. And I was like, I gave a warning, but I was like, yeah, let's go for it. I gave a warning, like, this is going to be intense, but like, okay, yeah, let's go for it. And they go hell for leather on this breath hold on an assault bike, and trying to recover the breathing after just 1 rep through the mask. Actually got to the point where I had to pull the mask off. I was like, what the hell is that? Like, that is the worst thing I've ever done. That was their words. The worst thing I've ever done in training. So it was definitely too potent a stimulus to start with. But interestingly, 2 things happened. His reaction then was, wow, can't wait to train this so that I make that okay. I want to make that easy, was immediately where his mindset went. So that like mental resilience, like, it's already there. And this is where understanding the people that you're working with. He was already there. It was like, boom, yeah. And then we just rationalized it. I went through again, just reminded, says, this is what's happening. This is what the mask is doing. This is what's happening when you're holding the breath and you're doing that. Yes, it's a real physiological response. Yes, it's a real physiological stress and a mental stress, but let's rationalize it. This is what you're experiencing. Are you with me? Have you got it? This is what you're experiencing. This is why you're experiencing it. And this is how I want us to control our response. He was like, yeah, good. So we had our, probably took us 2-3 minutes to sort of work through that and explain that and rationalize it. And then we actually just then went and did it immediately, straight away. And the only thing that was different was his psychology towards it. And I guess it wasn't the first time he's experienced it. And then he was okay with it. I mean, it was hard, but didn't have to pull the mask off and say, I'm a celebrity, get me out of it. Integrating the mask in with the breath holding, like, adds a whole another level of adaptation, and it is something that I think I'm using it more and more with people, and you're going to see more and more of it. I'm certain it's dramatic. It's a game changer. We just have to know how to integrate it in to people's programs. And then the final one is, I'd say, around return to injury. I've got loads of stories of this. We're using this quite regularly now, where if you imagine someone's coming back from injury and say they can, for whatever reason, they've had an operation or there's long-term injury, they can only work at, say, 50% of a max effort, or even if they can only walk or wherever they're at with their injury status, the longer they're not able to work at an intensity, the more deconditioning they're going to get. So one thing that we can do is we can't magically make their injury better. We also can't make them work hard, because it's going to, like, they just can't because they're injured, or we're worried about re-injuring them. But what we can do is we can give their body that experience of some anaerobic work even when they can't work at a rate that's going to generate that themselves, they're breathing normally. So breath holding is a great way to reduce the deconditioning effect that happens when we're out long-term injury, and it's really good when we're trying to get people back to return to play protocols after having been injured, because we can give them a real strong dose of that, like, anaerobic experience on a cellular level before they can actually get there with their training, and they won't have so that later stage rehab, and they won't have had as much deconditioning away from it if we've been doing some breath holding with them during those early stages of their rehab too. So really, really great opportunity when people are out injured, and it's also a nice. I think it's nice, like, psychologically. I used to hate being injured. Like, psychologically, it was hard. When any of the people, the athletes that I'm working with now, send me a message saying, yeah, I had one, like, literally just this week, tore hamstring, another one, knee injury, out for, multiple months, and you know one of my responses is, okay, that sucks and that's terrible, but, like, let's do some stuff with your breathing to help you with the recovery and to reduce the deconditioning. Let's look at where we're going to integrate some breath holding into your rehabilitation program, which psychologically is like, okay, it sucks that I'm injured, but, like, I'm going to work on this other thing, and, like, it just puts a slightly more positive spin on feeling like you're doing something rather than just feeling like you're getting unfit whilst you're out injured. So there's a psychological element to that. There's something to mention is that, just before we sort of wrap up towards the end of this, is that there are a couple of other benefits that we get from the hypoxic response that's been documented within the research for a while around. That's certainly helpful for particularly aerobic capacity, because a lot of this has been focused on, like, anaerobic, that we can get two things going on. We can get the spleen contraction in response to the hypoxia, to the low oxygen, which is a short-term response that lasts for, like, somewhere between 10 minutes up to an hour. Like, the spleen's like a blood bank, holds about 8% additional red blood cells, and it will release, when it contracts, it will release some red blood cells in response to the hypoxia to help your body with that oxygen carrying capacity. That's useful to have going around your body whilst you're doing the rest of your training session, hence why we'll often do some breath holding in warm-ups. There's a longer term effect where we've seen spikes of EPO increase of up to 24% in the literature, and that increase in EPO is a natural hormone within the body that stimulates the bone marrow to create new red blood cells, rather than the spleen's, like, releasing some and going to take them back in. The increase in EPO. The literature is a little bit the effect on the EPO is, yeah, there's some literature that says, yeah, we get 24% increase. There's other bits of literature that says not, and clearly there's something going on and something happening, and we see people like breath hold free divers that spend a lot of time practicing breath holding and getting hypoxic, have naturally, when we study that population, they have a higher level of hematocrit and red blood cell count. So there's something going on there for sure. How, I think, from what I observe, is how we do the breath holding protocols plays a role in whether we're actually, how much we're going to stimulate the kidneys to increase that EPO production for that increase in red blood cell, which is going to be helpful for our aerobic performance for sure. So I sort of summarised the practical application for us, and I'll take any questions. big important point before you do this for yourself, or if you're a coach working with clients, screening. So asking, we need to ensure that if they're pregnant, they're not doing breath holding. If you have any heart conditions or like serious underlying health conditions, we need to be doing a questionnaire or screening to ensure that like those type of population aren't stressing the body and the heart and the nervous system with breath holding. Yeah, but for a healthy population, an athletic population, it's totally safe to do. But just highlighting those two things is really important. If we take someone's BOLT score, if you haven't come across that, that's from the Oxygen Advantage in Buteyko, they call it the control pause, but a measure of our CO2 tolerance. If it's less than 10 seconds, then we really shouldn't be pushing people on breath holding. We want to get that BOLT score up over 10 or 15 seconds. If it is less than 10, I'd be and they were playing particularly if they're playing contact sports, I'd be thinking about and asking screening about concussions, because that can affect the respiratory centre as to why they're so sensitive to carbon dioxide. But ultimately, making things progressive. If you were wanting to get towards some of those 30-second intervals, which is a protocol that I use quite a lot with some of the athletes that have to work on their anaerobic performance, I don't start with going every 30 seconds because that's flipping really hard. We start with 60-second intervals, so going every minute with potentially a lower intensity, not working maximally, and then gradually reduce it down to 45 before going 30. I mean, you could even reduce it from 60 to 50 seconds to 40 seconds to 30 seconds. Like, make it progressive the way we introduce it in. So longer recovery periods in between efforts is going to be easier. Making the breath hold not maximal, so the breath hold time itself being like, okay, just go easy, a bit easier on this one. You don't want to go to max with your breath hold. I want it to be 75%, whatever. You can make that progressive, and then the intensity of the thing that you're doing during the breath hold. So you've got 3 things that you can do, you can change to make it progressive, and then start to think about making it sport specific in terms of the duration of the breath holds. The direction, is it do you need change of direction? Like in the basketball study, they had them doing like a 5-10-5 drill across the court, so lots of change of direction. Understanding like your work to rest ratios as to what you're trying to get out, what type of adaptation you're looking for, what type of either exercise or sport you play or that your clients play, and the intensity that you're making them work at. And that example with like injured players or people coming back from injuries, we're playing at that low intensity, but we're working on some of the other parameters. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for the practical application. I'll send out the slides for this so you can see and check some of those. You can look at some of those references firsthand if you would like to. There's something that I want to invite you to that I'm very excited about doing. Like, I've been working on this breath holding with athletes professionally and international athletes for like the last 3 years, experimenting on myself probably for the last 4 or 5, is it now? Something like that. Maybe 4 years, yeah. And I've been wanting to put together like a breath holding course for a while, but I've been sort of waiting till I feel like I've got it done the experimenting and I've got it sort of right, let's say. We're always learning, we're always developing things, but I'm very excited in January to be offering a 3-week breath holding course done online via Zoom. I do a lot of my coaching with my athletes one-on-one via Zoom as well. That's starting in January. And there's an early bird offer on at the moment until the end of the year, where rather than being £149, it's £95. But for you, as being a bit of a thank you for joining the webinar, if you use code webinar75, you get that 3-week breath holding course with me that starts in January for £75. That's it. And you can get coached by me. You're going to get access to all of the recordings of the sessions and the tutorials of the breath holding, bits of coaching that I put in there and programming. You'll have full access to that for as long as we're all alive and the internet's working and probreathwork.com website exists. So you get lifetime access to all of the content that we go in there, as well as the 3 weekly sessions done via Zoom. The details are on the probreathwork.com website. Your code is webinar75 in capitals, but I'll send the replay out with a link to that if anyone's keen to sign up. And if you do that before the end of the year, you get it for 75 quid. And finally, if you don't follow on Insta, or one thing I would really, just as a bit of a, if you're happy to, I would love you to take a little screenshot or a little picture on your phone or something, and share a little bit about what you've learned today through this session, or what, maybe share something that you're going to do differently off the back of it. Just share that on Instagram, tag me in, and I'll share those, because this is an area that a lot of people, like I was, were dismissive of it. We don't understand it. We have misconceptions about, like, well, breathing just happens naturally. Like, why do we need to practice it, or why do we need to do anything with it? Hopefully, you've seen from this why it can be so impactful, why it can be so, particularly for a sporting and exercise context. So yeah, I'd love you to help spread and share that with the world. And yeah, if you tag us in on Insta, I will share them. If you put a little something on stories or whatever, then I will share them with you as well. So I will take any questions. Look at that timing, 18:00, bang on 6 o'clock. Everyone always says I'm not on time. Is there anything anyone got any questions that's here live, or I can have a look in the chat box? Mark is on a train. I keep cutting out, watch back later. Okay. Right, let me just go back. Okay, George, that's a good question. Is the improvement maintained for a period of time after the study, or is there a drop off in training if training is maintained or isn't maintained? So there wasn't a follow up from the study that I haven't seen. That yes, if you like anything, if you stop doing something, then you'll get deconditioned from it. Now, to maintain what we create is nowhere near as hard as creating it in the first place. So you won't have to work as hard to maintain a certain level of like ability as you would have to in the first instance of maintaining it. So particularly in things like strength training, we can, if you get good at pull-ups and then you stop doing pull-ups, you're going to get weaker again from them. But there's plenty of literature out there that shows that just one strength session a week is enough to maintain strength, to maintain levels for, I can't remember how long it is. It's like absolutely it's for months, just doing one session a week. So something like this, they were training twice a week with those breath holds. It might be just you just do one session, or half of the session is done with the breath holding to maintain it. But great question. I don't have the scientific answer of like exactly what that follow up was. It's one of the things that with studies like that, they'll go in and do an intervention. They'll do their 4-week intervention. They'll test the start, test the finishing, and there you go. There's our results. It's down to people like me to go, okay, let's do that. Let's take that and put that into the practical application on the actual training field with people in the gym and whatnot, and let's see what that practical application looks like. So that's probably going to be ongoing. Reef says, thanks, Jacko. Thanks heaps. Vic, thank you. Awesome info as ever. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Does anyone have any questions on it? No? Is anyone interested to join me for some breath holding in January? Is anyone looking forward to Christmas? I'm just going to answer. Doug is like nodding to, not looking forward to Christmas, but looking forward to breath holding. Maybe, yeah, nice. I'm excited about doing that. All right, well, maybe I did a good job in explaining it so there weren't any questions, but if there are any questions, feel free to shout out. If there aren't, or you want to use the chat box, but if there aren't, then I will just simply say thank you for joining, and yeah, if you got any questions, then you can always follow up on email. I'll send out the replay on email, and that link I'll send out the link to the breath hold course, but it's on the website at the moment. If you go, you can go and find it, but I'll send you the link. Otherwise, have a great Christmas. If I didn't see you before, hear from me before then, and hopefully I'll see some of you for the breath hold course in January. Give you some fist bumps. Thanks for joining all. Take care.